Good morning. Today our big question of the day is, how do our experiences define us? We are very lucky to have a special guest joining us today. He is here to analyze the 6 books that are very prevalent in the high schools of today. Please help me welcome Mr. Daniel Lev.
I'm very pleased to be here.
Shall we begin? So, let's start by analyzing Catcher in the Rye. So Daniel, how does Salinger express how negative experiences affect where we place ourselves in society?
After Allie's death, Holden becomes sensitive and he isolates himself. Through the scene in which Holden looks down at the football field, Salinger conveys that Holden is not only isolating himself from society, but he isolates himself from the idea of childhood, which is directly connected to Allie's death. After leaving his school and heading to New York, he tries to escape his childhood and enter the adult world, but he's stuck in the middle. To Holden, childhood and school life was all about being surrounded by phonies, and that is what it's like now in the adult world. We are again shown how Holden makes himself an exception and isolates himself.
So Daniel, why does Holden think everyone's a phony?
Well, the reason Holden calls many people phonies is because he believes he's in a situation that nobody else is in, which is a situation of also isolation. When he calls somebody a phony, in his eyes they're acting immaturely, even though in reality it might be normal. This causes Holden to become very pessimistic and to make general assumptions about these people.
So, that sums up the Catcher in the Rye. Let's move on to a separate piece. Someone from the audience sent us in a question to ask you. Ashton Forrester asks, why and how do people redefine themselves when faced with hardships?
That's a very good question. In a separate piece, John Knowles puts Gene in a very tough situation. Gene needs to take blame for breaking Finney's leg, even though he does not know why he did it. When Finney goes on rehabilitation leave, Gene starts to emulate his behavior, and he starts to act, talk, and dress like Finney. This is because he believes Finney is a perfect Jesus-like figure. Gene believes that by becoming Finney, all of his hardships and sins of his past will disappear.
But why did this happen when Finney left the school?
Well, this marks one of the first times that Gene and Finney have been apart, at least at school. Gene and Finney always did things together at school and were the perfect best friends. But when Finney leaves, Gene realizes that Finney has an outstanding effect on his life.
Thank you, Ashton Forrester, for the question. Let's keep going with Night by Elie Wiesel. How does recognition of mortality influence what we know to be true?
Elie is a Hasidic Jew, which means that he's very religious. He sees that the scriptures and the Torah prove God's existence, and he strongly believes in God's existence as well. When Elie enters a concentration camp and witnesses all the death and mortality around him, he immediately starts to question why God would allow such a terrible thing to happen. Later on in the book, Elie witnesses the public hanging of a child. Metaphorically, this represents the public hanging of God in front of him, because Elie would never associate God with death, and he does not comprehend that God would allow such a terrible thing to happen.
So, are there any other examples in Night of things that influence what we know to be true?
Well, on a universal note, it is known that fathers are supposed to take care of children, but when Elie's father becomes deathly ill, Elie is forced to take care of him, even though later he realizes that his own being is more important than anybody else's.
Wow, that really shows how mortality influences truth.
Absolutely.
Let's move on to As I Lay Dying. So, how does isolation and the way we are viewed affect our actions?
Well, first I want to discuss isolation. When Darrell was living with his family in the country, not yet going to Jefferson, he had freedom of action and freedom of control and speech, which allowed him to come off as not insane, as almost normal in this isolated comfort zone state. When one enters society, their true character is shown. So when Darrell entered society and his actions did not change, he was interpreted as insane, which is what defines Darrell as really insane.
But how does society's view of Darrell affect his actions?
Well, that is exactly the problem. Universally speaking, when people exit their comfort zone, they tend to act differently. Society defines Darrell as insane, and that is because when Darrell leaves isolation and enters society, he doesn't change his actions to adapt to that societal norm.
Oh, so this is ultimately what defines Darrell as insane.
Absolutely. Wow, I see next we have A Good Man Is Hard to Find by Flannery O'Connor. She's just magnificent. Shall we keep going?
Yes. How do our past experiences define us in the present?
Well, that is a very thoughtful question. I mean, the misfit bases his criminal identity on his past. He says he woke up in a penitentiary, but he doesn't know how he got there, and the only thing that can prove it are the papers. He defines himself in the present based on his unknown past. The misfit is also unwilling to change his ways because if he is caught, he knows that he will face many punishments, but also because he believes so strongly that his past is the truth.
So, why do you think these are the actions he decided to take?
Well, the misfit doesn't know any better. For all of his life, he has only known that he is a criminal. He does not remember his past before his criminal life, and that's why he defines himself as a criminal.
Interesting. So now, for the big finale, Slaughterhouse-5.
Oh yeah.
Daniel, how does passively living your life destroy the meaning of it?
When Billy starts to time travel, he loses the meaning of living. He knows what is going to happen to him and to other people, and starts living life passively. The point of life, in my eyes, is to live actively and to have new experiences and gain new intellect. But Billy reliving these experiences is exactly the opposite. He is missing that experience factor in his life.
So, how does this connect to our theme? How do our experiences define us?
Well, Billy isn't really experiencing very much, so his not real experiences aren't a real representation of who he really is.
So that was our last book for today. I hope everyone learned something today. And thank you, Daniel, for coming and joining us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Wow, what a guest.